It used to be so easy to travel between Commonwealth countries, because I'm old and I can remember when that was the case, but it's no longer. No longer.
Well, you mentioned you're old. So where exactly from Canada you're from, and what was it like growing up there?
I am from Alberta, and specifically I live in Edmonton, Alberta currently, and that is where BioWare is based, which was fortunate for me to have a video game company in my town and to get to work for them for years and years.
That's right.
But originally I am from a small town called Sedgwick, Alberta, a town of 900 people.
Also very small.
Very small.
Like
quite
30
small.
Days of Night small?
Yeah, quite small. I don't know how big was Barrow. I think it's smaller than Barrow, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
cool.
Maybe not Barrow in the winter. But anyway, so it was 900 people, and my father was actually the town doctor there. And he and my mom moved to Canada from Ireland in the 70s. My dad's originally from South Africa, though he is of Indian extraction. It's a very complex web that I weave. But they moved to Canada in the 70s. My sister and I were born there. And that means, of course, I am a dual citizen of Ireland and Canada. I just got it automatically. And my sister actually moved back to Ireland, and that's where she and her family live now.
That's right. So a very small town. So you went to school locally, or did you have to travel for school, like as a kid?
We actually were lucky enough to have the feeder school. So we were the town that had the high school, and everybody else had to bus in from surrounding towns to go to school.
So you were the hub.
We were the hub, and in fact, I lived like a block from school, so I was able to just go home for lunch. And
so all the network of like 60-person towns had to travel to where you were.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there were smaller towns than us. Like we were one of the larger towns in the area.
So it's obviously a rural area. Is this like further up north?
No, it's sort of southern central Alberta.
Okay, so for those of you,
but it's still like it's very far north. It's like hours north of the U.S. border.
So like you went on the border of Montana or anything? Like
no,
that?
No. We're actually Edmonton is one of the they're sort of the closest large city to us, and it's the northernmost large city in Canada. Most Canadian cities are sort of dotted along the U.S. border, but we're a little further north than that, and we're just east of the Rocky Mountains.
So, was there a drama school element to your elementary school education?
There was no drama classes. There wasn't even art classes. I had to take art by correspondence, because you essentially had to choose straight scholastics or sports. Those were, your choices, and I chose Dungeons and Dragons. And Dungeons and Dragons was in a lot of ways my very first acting experience, because again, I didn't have any drama classes, no instruction in school. It was my first improvisation experience, and I do a lot of improv now. And it was my first experience doing voices, because when you're the dungeon master, you play all the NPCs.
So, I mean, if that was your earliest memory, acting was playing D&D. And
D&D,
does anyone in the room, is anyone familiar with the game Dungeons and Dragons? Does anyone do that one? Yeah, okay, cool. So there's some familiarity with it.
And Dungeons & Dragons was my first, but certainly not the only. Back in the 80s, because again, I started playing Dungeons & Dragons in like 1981 when I was still in elementary school.
What was the vibe like around?
The height of the Satanic Panic.
Okay,
that's when I started.
And just in case anyone doesn't know what that is, what was the Satanic
Have you
Panic?
seen the Stranger Things, kids? It's like that. It was basically everyone seemed to go insane at once and just decide your nerdy little hobby is it's going to be the destruction of the youth. It sort of I'd only read about the sort of moral panic around comic books in the 1950s, and then it was
the Comics Code Authority.
Yeah, and for the first couple of years I was playing, it was fine, and then around 83, 84, that's when it really started to kick in, and it started in the States first, but it spread to Canada very quickly, and it was sort of. Several things were lumped in together. Dungeons & Dragons was one, heavy metal music was the other. And these were sort of seen as this, again, I guess we have modern experience with it, this weird satanic conspiracy that was going to destroy the youth, and everyone was going to be sacrificed or something. And it's like, no, it's just pretending while rolling dice. It's pretending with math. That's all it is. Yeah. And collective storytelling with your friends. But in a way, I'm sort of glad that I lived through that. I lived through that period of time.
So how did your parents feel about you playing games like this?
They were not terribly religious, but my dad is the town doctor, so if everybody is panicking about it, he can't just be flouting it, so he was always they were a bit cagey about it. And I had to keep my marks up very high if I wanted to keep my Dungeons and Dragons books. I'll say that, and I did.
Oh, you did.
And,
Oh,
and it was
gonna be a
solely
follow-up
so I could
question.
keep playing Dungeons and Dragons. And that is, to their credit, I will say this. They were willing to give up part of their summer vacation to take me to my first Gen Con in Milwaukee, of all places. That's where it was held back then. So I managed, they wouldn't let me go alone, but they went to Milwaukee for a weekend where, you know, they were like, I guess we'll take your sister to the zoo. And
So again, just before we get, because we are not in North America, has anyone
Yes.
here been to Gen Con before? So could you quickly explain
Gen
what
Con
Gen Con is?
is essentially, it was very focused around Dungeons and Dragons and RPGs initially. Now, of course, it casts a wider net, and it's more like PAX. It's like all sorts of gaming, but at its core, it's RPGs. So it's sort of like the original convention for that in the States, and a bit of a mecca for Dungeons and
Yeah,
Dragons
it was
players.
started by Gary Gygax in Milwaukee, I believe, in like his backyard was one of the first
It's
ones.
first started in Lake Geneva.
Oh, pardon me, like Geneva,
Where
right?
Dungeons and
that's
Dragons
Gen
was
Con,
created,
yeah.
and then eventually it got bigger and bigger. And by the the late '80s, when I went, it was in Milwaukee. These days, it's in Indianapolis. I know you've been.
I've been a number of times. Yeah,
Yes.
it's a very good time. Think of it if PAX was pretty much just only tabletop, and there was also an extra 20,000 people there.
Yes.
And you were in scenic Indianapolis.
Yes.
Yeah, if anyone's ever seen Parks and Recreation, it's exactly the same. So you went to your first Gen Con. Did you say it was 81?
87. 81 is
87.
when I started playing. 87, I went to my first Gen
Okay,
Con.
not that I'm trying to date you, but how old were you when you first went there?
You can date me. I'm in my 50s. So.
You were a teenager, or you were?
I was a teenager when I went to Gen Con. I was like in 5th grade. I was like 10 years old when I started playing.
But you had a group of people you played with in your hometown.
I did, yeah,
yeah.
a small group.
Yeah.
There was probably only about like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
It was, again, the nerds of today have no idea how good they have it. Because
That's what
our
I'm trying to
interests,
get
like,
to, yeah.
everything that I like, comic books and Dungeons and Dragons, and they were very, very niche, nerdy hobbies and looked down upon by the general public. These days, like, you can play everybody plays video games, for starters. And comic books, of course, comic book movies are very popular. So, yeah, there's not quite the social stigma attached to it. But again, much like the Satanic Panic, in some ways, I'm glad I went through that crucible. Yeah. It leaves you a stronger nerd at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. What doesn't kill you make you stronger?
Yes.
But as a nerd, yeah.
What does not kill you makes you nerdier.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So that first Gen Con obviously wouldn't have been 100,000 people in 87.
No, it was
Maybe a
still,
couple of
again, coming from a small town in Canada,
would've
it was
been
just
a
like,
lot.
oh my God.
So
And it was the first major convention that I actually went to. And
yeah, that's what I'm asking. So
Yeah.
what's the? Was there a moment, or do you have a really a prescient memory from that time, being like, oh, this is a really cool thing. I wish I could involve myself in this. Or was there anything that happened to you, or a game you played,
I
or
already
something
was
you
obsessed
saw?
with. I was
Yeah.
already obsessed with Dungeons and
But
Dragons.
had you ever
right from the
seen a
get-go.
room of people like that many people? Like
No, the
it's
big
before
thing
the
about
internet, right? So
the big thing about that was just like, oh, there's more of us. Like, again, I went to school in a very small town, and there's only probably about 4 to 6 other people that play at all regularly. And to just go there and there's just hundreds of people and dozens of Dungeons and Dragons games happening within your field of view. That was great. That was when I felt very validated. And of course, these days it's much easier to find that validation.
yeah, you can just go online, right? So was that your first time playing a game with strangers?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. Did you win?
Did I? I think actually yes. I think my character, because a lot of the Dungeons and Dragons games, especially back then, they were what they used to call meat grinder dungeons, where it's just basically, okay, the dungeon master is actively trying to kill you, and let's see which
It's
character.
very adversarial.
Yeah, it was a
edition of
bit
the
more
game,
adversarial.
Really,
But I really enjoyed myself, and one of my characters did survive until the end, and I think that was just in a straight Dungeons and Dragons game. I also got to essentially play for the first time. I had the books and I'd read them, but my friend, it was the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, the original version that TSR
That was
put
the
out.
D20 one.
Sorry?
The D20. D20 Marvel Superheroes?
It was the Phase Rip, what they call Phase Rip, which stood for Fighting, Agility, Strength, Endurance, Reason, Intuition, Psyche, and those were the stats.
And he still remembers all
I
this.
still.
Isn't
I
that cool?
played that for years.
If anyone was coming in here being like, I wonder if he's a real nerd.
Yeah,
Like,
that's true.
The phase rip,
The
everybody.
phase rip system. There are people who are, there's websites, people still like that system. So that was the first time I'd actually got to sit down and play. The other thing, of course, is that I didn't have much opportunity to play. When I started, I was brought in at 10 years old by some older kids because nobody wanted to play the cleric. They just needed someone to play a cleric, and I was like, "Whoa!" So they taught me how to play, because just so they'd have somebody to be like their medic, essentially. And I loved it.
You loved playing a cleric? Or you
Yeah,
loved the game?
because I didn't know any better. It's like, I'd like to play a wizard cleric. Sure, I get to roll dice. It's fun. And eventually I got to play other characters as well. But after a couple of years, all of them moved on because they were older than me, and so they were like, no, we don't play D&D.
Oh, so you're supposed to stop playing D&D at some point?
Yeah, well,
No one told me that.
That's certainly
All right.
what they thought, and most of them did. Some of them came back, but that left me abandoned, and I was like, oh. I realized if I want to keep playing Dungeons & Dragons, first of all, I'm going to have to learn how to DM, and then I'm going to have to teach other people how to play, and in this town, that's the only way I'll do it. And that's what I did. So when I went to Gen Con, the opportunity to play again, that was just such a joy.
So was that the first game you would say you obsessed over?
D&D first, and then, as I say, very swiftly, Marvel Superheroes, played a lot of that. A little later, GURPS. I got very into GURPS.
And what's GURPS?
That's a generic universal role-playing system. That was Steve Jackson Games put that out, and that was essentially what it sounds like. It was just a framework, and then they put out supplements like, this is the fantasy supplement, this is the science fiction supplement, this is the horror supplement, and I especially got into playing GURPS Supers, which is their comic book superhero thing, especially because they had an excellent source world. Like their default setting was very well thought out, and I got quite into it.
And when did you play Call of Cthulhu for the first time?
Call of Cthulhu was probably, I played it a little bit. And the first memory I have of the game was seeing an ad for it in Dragon magazine. And I knew Lovecraft I knew Lovecraft and Cthulhu mostly because of all the references that were put into Marvel Comics, and like the Conan connection, and the sort of vaguely Lovecraftian things in the Marvel universe, like Shumagorath, they're sort of Cthulhu, or Cthon, I guess, is more of their Cthulhu stand-in. Shumagorath is more of their Azathoth stand-in. So I knew it vaguely from that. And I did buy one of the books, but again, I had no one to actually play it with. I didn't really get to play it properly. I think that, at a party once, I think, just did like a very quick scenario, which we didn't even finish because there was no time, which is how it always goes. But to actually properly play it, it was my first year of university. When I moved to university,
let's not dive too ahead in the timeline here. We're still in your teenage years, all right? Okay.
You asked me about Call of Cthulhu.
I know. Well, I just want to double check because I was going to ask you, I was initially going to ask you, what were your favorite tabletop games as a kid? Growing up in the 70s and 80s, there probably wasn't video games. You've already established that, and I was going to ask you how those favorites changed in adulthood, but it sounds like a lot of them are the same. You still love the same games.
I did drift away from D&D for a while.
Yeah.
So D&D was very much all the way through junior high school. And high school, once I went to university, they also, I was playing AD&D, and then they switched to second edition and played a little bit of that, but it didn't have, I didn't know the rules as intimately. And then there was the allure of playing new games, getting to play GURPS and getting to play Marvel Superheroes, and there's only so much time. I got really back into D&D, again, this is going forward in the future a bit, with third edition, especially when they started putting out a lot of Ravenloft material, because that's my favorite setting. And so when they put out the Gazetteers and
the vampire,
the Gothic horror, werewolves,
okay. It was your favorite setting. Okay, yeah, interesting.
So and now you asked about board games.
Well, I was going to say, I wasn't alive, so
I was alive in the 70s.
I know. But when I was young, video games were still relatively new, at least mainstream. So I would assume that you weren't big on there was no home console gaming, So when I was saying your favorite gaming,
talking about
Atari,
the
I don't know.
Atari and television, those things.
Yeah.
I sadly had loving parents who got taken in by a fast-talking salesman. And they came home for, when everyone else that Christmas, when everyone got an Atari or in television, I got something called an Odyssey 2, which was, a basic, a rip-off sort of clone. And it's not like the games were that much worse or anything in quality, But first of all, they weren't the name brand Space Invaders or what have you. So it was like, nah, I got the crappy department store version of the popular thing. But the main thing was, back in those days, it was very popular to trade your cartridges, right? Because they were, these are expensive. These could be up to $20, and so kids would usually own 2 or 3 cartridges of their own, but then they would swap and trade, so you'd get to play all the games for that system. Just bring them into school and trade with your friends.
Does anyone know at all what he's talking about? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
good.
so
Yeah,
you
just
get the
checking.
vague idea. Yeah, because they used to,
the concept of swapping a piece of physical media
a piece
with
of
somebody
physical
else.
media. Yeah. So I, of course, wasn't able to trade with anyone because no one had this system that no one had ever heard of.
That's actually really sad.
Yeah, it
so
was a
you
bit
just got
sad.
really good at like.
Especially because they had a Dungeons and Dragons game on in television.
Oh, really?
I
Like
wanted
wait,
it in
was it a real
television
one?
specifically. What?
Like a licensed D&D?
A licensed D&D
Okay.
things, and it was basically just like this pixel with a sword will move in through here, and there's a pixel that I guess could be a dragon.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. So, I mean, you said those things have changed. But so when you were growing up, you're obviously very into all the tabletop stuff. You love pulp, I don't know, I said pulp fiction then, but no, I didn't mean pulp fiction. You loved like comic books.
Comic books, yeah.
Pop
and
culture, all that kind
to
of
an
stuff.
extent, Pulp Fiction. Yeah,
So,
like
but-
I'd read
Yeah.
the old Conan
real
stuff.
Pulp Fiction, not the 1994 film, but
No,
the
not
actual Pulp
1980
Fiction.
No,
Yeah.
actual pulp, like the Doc Savage stuff and Tarzan and Conan and various things.
So I mean,
The Shadow.
This question's played, but hopefully we'll go somewhere. But when you were growing up and having these obsessions and going to school, you said your father was a doctor. Did you have any notion of what you wanted to do when you got older?
It was expected that I would go into medicine. 'Cause
Oh,
like
okay.
My entire family, it's like everybody tends to be my sister is a doctor, her husband, my brother-in-law, is a doctor, all my cousins, they tend to be doctors of one sort or another, so it was just like, oh, no, you're going to go into med school.
And you, as a young kid, were you like, oh, I will be a doctor one day, and you didn't really think about it, or was there like
that's what I've been told, so I guess so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, at what point you mentioned a moment ago you did go to university. What did you study?
I was in science. Like
Oh,
I
you
was
really?
On, yeah, I
Okay,
was
so-
like, okay, well, I guess I'll get my science degree, and then I'll go to med school, and that's what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
Sadly, that got a bit derailed when I did do a little bit of acting in university and just realized, oh no, I want to do this.
Well, that was my
I
question.
want
is
to pretend for a living.
When did
That's
you
all.
realize that
Yeah.
you wanted to pursue a career in performance?
Yes.
So and so what was the part?
The very first thing I'd say, it was a thing called the Teen Festival of the Arts that used to happen in Edmonton.
And this was in the early 90s?
This would have been, late 80s, early 90s. And so I'd gone, as a high school student, I'd gone to this. Like, they would put us on a bus and take us to the city, and we would go to this festival. And it was essentially teens acting in shows that had been written by professional, established, and name directors and writers. They would work with these teens, and they'd basically put on like a fringe festival, but with all these new works that were specifically written for young audiences for young audiences and for young actors to
So
perform.
it was original stuff you were doing.
It was original stuff, yeah.
So
what
was the part that you played?
I
when you
had
this
always
revelation?
been very interested in it. We couldn't do it ourselves because I lived in a small town very
Yeah.
far away. But once I moved to the city, I decided, well, I'm going to audition for it. I want to try, even though my only acting experience is Dungeons and Dragons. And I was lucky enough to get cast in a production, and it was a comedy production by a local comedy troupe that actually had a show on television at the time, so it was very impressive for all of us. And I was a big fan of Monty Python and Kids in the Hall, and I don't know if you guys know Kids in the Hall, Canadian sketch comedy troupe. They basically were getting kids to write and perform this sketch comedy, and they were directing it. And I was a big fan of sketch comedy. I did a comic strip, so I knew how to, write a joke. And that's what I actually auditioned with. Like, instead of writing material, I just gave them a bunch of copies of my comic. And they said, okay, so obviously you can write comedy, like, we'll cast you in the show. And they suggested improv is a very good way to generate sketch material. I, of course, didn't know it's like, I don't understand, because the only improv I knew was Evening at the Improv, which used to be a stand-up show for stand-up comedians. And everybody else in the show had taken improv training in their drama classes, and so they basically had to teach me from the ground up. And much like
what was learning improv like? What was the first improv lesson? Did they like here's a prompt
the
to do it? Oh, they
basic
told you
rules
about
of
yes
improv,
and
you know, it is just pretending. I mean, I'm improvising what I'm saying right now. We all
theory.
improvise all the
Do you want
time.
to do a real one?
Yes, of course.
Do a real one right now. So do you want a prompt?
Sure.
Okay, get some context for the prompt. So what, you want a sentence, a single word, an object? What do you want? Or could it be anything?
Well, we're going to be doing the scene together.
Oh.
Not so
I'm
brave
only
now.
at D&D
But
level.
Essentially, yeah, the essential rule of improv is accepting and saying yes. So in this situation, when you go, oh, we're going to do an improv scene, I won't go, no, I don't want to do one. I'll go, all right, I'll play along.
I found a loophole in this conversation by
So
you
saying
say
yes and
to
not
everything.
blocking and
Okay.
narrative. And the other thing is, like I say, it is just pretending. Once I started doing improv, that's when I knew that's what I want to do for the rest of my life and what I want to do for my career.
Okay.
I dropped out of university in short order to essentially join the circus, and I started doing improv professionally.
All right. Well, someone yell out a prompt for Mark.
Circus. All right. Now, what kind of scene are we going to do together, Brian?
What kind? What? Date night at the circus.
Date night. Okay, date night at a circus.
Is that all you would get?
There are many improv games. There are many improv games. For example, we could do a game where, we'll call it pickup lines. This is a good game to apply for this. So date night at a circus. Now, normally we get a member of the audience up here, and they would sort of say whether the pickup line worked or not. You're going to be our guinea pig for this.
Okay.
So basically, with the prompt date night at the circus, I will give you pickup lines, and you can either, give me an or a ding.
Oh, okay, good. So I don't have to do any pretend. I can just say.
No. You can just say whether the pickup line works or not.
Okay, sure. All right. Date night at the circus.
Yeah.
We didn't prepare this earlier. There's no plants. All right.
All right. So a clown walks up to you and says, "You know what they say about guys with big shoes?"
What do they say?
Well, no. Now you don't have to play along. You just have to give me an or a ding.
Oh, okay.
Would that clown get you in bed?
I'm intrigued.
Okay, well, that sounds like a ding to me. And that's saying yes. That's acceptance, folks. A big round of applause for Brian.
That could have gone much worse. So you said you glazed over it, but you didn't finish your science degree. I'm not judging, but you did.
No. I completely just dropped the hell out of university.
And was that a conversation, or was that just like, I've made the decision, this is what I'm doing?
I just stopped going to classes. Yeah, my parents were really happy about that. Yes, but things have worked out. As somebody very early in my career told me, it's like, they're upset now, but get your name in the papers a few times and they'll come around. And that's true. We used to have newspapers, by the way. Yeah.
So you said you essentially joined the circus. Are you serious?
Yeah, joined the circus in that, I joined an improv troupe.
Okay, not like a traveling tent.
No,
circus
well, it was traveling because, doing it professionally, you are essentially going around and doing, corporate functions and things like that.
Okay.
My friend Donovan always calls those gigs like, how does he say? The analogy he uses is, it's like being birthday clowns for drunk adults.
So, I mean, I was going to ask you, at what point did you realize you could do this like full time? Like, did you have another job in college? Were you like flipping burgers or anything?
I've never really had a real job. I'll say this: I waited tables for I think about 2 months before getting fired. And it was like right before I would have got unemployment benefits too.
Oh, okay.
And it was just like I realized I'm not cut out for this shit. and I bear my manager absolutely no ill will. He was completely justified. The last straw was when full disclosure, me and a bunch of the guys from the restaurant dropped acid.
That's a crime.
Yeah. Well, okay. So it wasn't on company time.
Oh, okay.
So it was after work. A bunch of us all dropped acid, and it was guys from the kitchen. Never drop acid with guys from the kitchen. I was a waiter.
You were front of house.
Yeah, I was front of house, and so had a wild night. It was great. Very good times, fun times. Don't regret a thing. All of them managed to get up and get into work.
It was your first time.
And it was my first time, so I did not get into work on time. I showed up I'd say at least 20 minutes late. And I had some cockamamie story worked out of why I was late. It was great. And I got about, a few words into it before the manager was just like, yeah, the other guys already told me you all dropped acid last night. So,
did you work that
like
shift?
I say, no ill will, he was justified.
Okay. So you didn't work that shift?
Sorry?
You didn't work that
I
shift?
did not work that shift.
Okay.
I decided that pretending for a living was what I was
Okay.
going for.
And you could have stayed in bed. So
I could have just stayed in bed.
Yeah.
I know. It would have been the same result.
So, all right. So you joined this traveling improv group.
We had a theater, but again, like we would just do the actual money came from corporate gigs where it would be like, okay, you got to go to a town 2 hours north, and you're doing.
You do like a team building thing for like a.
Sometimes in those days there wasn't that much team building. It was straight up like we'd be booked for an evening of entertainment. It would be like a stand-up opening for us, and then we'd do an hour-long improv show, and maybe there'd be a band, and so that's what it was.
Okay, so I suppose this is another slight pivot, but when was your first thought of like, I'm going to try for a VO role in something?
Oh, there was no sort of like, I'm going to be a voice actor now.
No,
it was. I was essentially, as I say, only cut out for pretending. So I had no other job. So when you're an actor who doesn't do anything else for a living, you take what work is available. So you'll do a commercial here, you'll do a voiceover for radio. I'd done a lot of like radio VO and stuff like that, commercials and otherwise.
You get commercials? Like one of the annoying ones where people yammer back and forth, or like a little jingle, or what?
Usually it would just be, the voiceover thing where it's like, more recently I did, national pizza commercials where it's just for whatever pizza chain.
Do you remember
like,
what it was?
Hey,
what
come
was
for a New York special. They get a Canadian guy to do a cheesy, cartoony New York voice. But yes, so much like that in the old days. Furniture store ads, everything. And plays, and sometimes little bits on film, and like not a lot of television production in Edmonton, but every now and then a production rolls through, and they're shooting on location. So in the midst of all of that, I found out that from friends of mine that were improvisers and comedians, that a video game company had opened in town called BioWare, and oddly enough, the comedy troupe that gave me my start, Three Dead Trolls in a Baggie, and another comedy troupe, Atomic Improv, which is, those guys were hired to do all the voices for one of BioWare's very early games, MDK2.
What was the name of the game?
MDK2.
MDK2.
It was like out in the 90s.
Any MDK2 heads in the audience?
It's from 1995.
People are hardcore. There's like a few people.
There we go.
All right. Did those people that knew it, did you know that all the voices were done by two improv groups?
Yeah.
Fake fans.
That was, let's see, Wes Borg, Joe Bird, R.I.P., Donovan Workin, and Paul Mather. And they're friends of mine. And so once I found out that, I was like, oh my God, okay, so there's a video game company in town. Let me know if there's auditions.
So were you still gaming while you...
Yeah, by that point, I got back into console gaming. Like, the Odyssey 2 aside, Sega and everything had come along. I wasn't that much into console gaming. I was like mostly like RPGs and things like that for my spare time activities. And improv was taking up a lot of my spare time as well. But I got back into console gaming with Resident Evil 2. I was visiting my sister at her university in Ireland, actually. And
did she have a stern conversation with you about what you were doing with your life?
No, she's my younger sister.
Oh, okay. So she can't do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if she's in school and you're here like, hey, I just got Resident Evil 2.
I was just her near-do-well older brother. But it was actually one of her dorm mates had Resident Evil 2. I was like, oh my God, the graphics are amazing. I've been away from video games for a while.
Yeah.
And I was a big zombie movie fan, so this is essentially a zombie movie you can play. Oh my God! So I immediately, when I got home, I bought a GameCube. I bought all the Resident Evil stuff that I could, and I played that. That's what got me back into console. So I was a gamer at the time that BioWare launched in the late '90s.
So you're aware that voices in video games are a thing, because
of
they
course.
wouldn't have been when you were playing your knockoff Atari in 1981.
No, they weren't. There was no voices. But of course, I was familiar with modern games, and I was a gamer. So when, like I said, I just was like, let me know if there's any auditions or anything like that. I'd love to do some video game voice work. And BioWare eventually started doing these old-fashioned cattle call auditions where they just bring everybody in town into a recording studio. Everybody does a couple of minutes in the booth, and then we'll let you know.
So and they asked you to prepare something, or was it just...
Usually, we just had sides, and they would say, okay, we're looking for this style of voice. Give me this line, give me this line.
Do you remember what your first audition at BioWare, do you remember what
it was just
for?
some generic Like
Grunts,
there was
barks.
some military stuff. There was like they'd already done like the first Baldur's Gate when this edition happened. So there was like vaguely fantasy stuff. It was all very generic. And from the strength of that audition, I got hired for a single line in Baldur's Gate 2 in the final cutscene. So you had to play the entire 40 hours to see my one line. But they liked it enough that they kept hiring me back on all subsequent projects, like Neverwinter Nights and...
Because everyone here now knows that BioWare was huge and extremely impactful on a lot of people's lives and on the industry.
Yes.
Was there a sense of that gravitas in the late 90s when you were there doing the stuff? Did you think like, wow, this is one of the top, like this is going to be something real big, the stuff I'm doing here
Well,
in
the
these
fact
games?
that they were doing an actual licensed Dungeons and Dragons game like that was like, holy shit to me. I was like thrilled.
Did you like let them know that you're really into D&D?
I did, and I was really upfront about it.
Yeah.
And I think that actually helped with me getting hired again because they were doing a lot of D&D games at the time. They, of course, did Baldur's Gate and Throne of Baal, Shadows of Amn, all the DLC for that, Kingmaker, Neverwinter Nights. They knew I was a D&D player, and that meant there was a shorthand. So they didn't have to waste time. If they say, this character is a kobold shaman, they wouldn't have to explain to me, okay, a kobold is this, and this is a shaman or a shaman. And they could just tell me, this is a kobold shaman, and I'd go, oh, so it's lawful evil then, and I know what god it worships, and so they could just throw me in the booth very easily like that. Also, I lived 5 minutes walk from the studio. They used to be...
So if you had to do pickups, you would just call them up?
Yeah, if they needed pickups, it's like, yeah, I'll probably be home. I might be on acid. No, I wasn't. Yeah. But it's like, I was, a typical sort of like, all I do is acting, so I do my shows at night, so if you need something in the day, I'll probably be around. And that meant that I developed a working relationship with BioWare. I did, like I said, pretty much every subsequent thing. Did a lot of demo work on the original Knights of the Old Republic.
So it was 2000, well, that game was in 2003 or 4, right?
Yeah,
so
so
you
we
would have been doing that in
early
2001?
2000s. Yeah,
around then. So at what point, just a brief digression, because like I said, I have spent a lot of time with you. I also spent a lot of time with your wonderful wife, Belinda, who is also an actor. And
also, and if you've played Mass Effect, she is the very first voice that you hear in the very first game, because she's the voice of the Alliance computer. And also plays a number of recurring characters, several Asari and whatnot throughout the thing.
Yes,
and plays a lot more central characters than me in the Dragon Age games, because she's British, so she didn't have to fake her accent. She plays Galdana, Alistair's sister in the first one. She's the Baroness in Dragon Age Awakenings, or sorry, Awakenings. So.
Yeah. I was going to ask, did you meet Belinda through your work at BioWare, or did she get work at BioWare through knowing you?
No, we met through improv.
Oh, so it was improv. So you'd met before
Yes,
then.
she was already living in Edmonton and married to me when that happened.
Okay,
so
that worked out well.
we met at the Orlando Fringe Festival. They were having a big...
In Florida.
In Florida. They have a Fringe Festival. SAC Theatre, which is their big improv company, had an international tournament. And so we were the team from Canada, and Belinda was on one of the English teams. And so we met there.
Sorry, it was an improv tournament.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were out improvising each other?
Are you familiar with Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yeah, but then where the points made up and nothing matters, or what?
Yeah, except the points did matter for this.
Okay, all right.
Because, they didn't really matter, but it is, it's like, this team was funnier, they get to advance.
Right, okay. Who placed better, the Canadian team or the
I'm afraid the
English team?
Canadian team did place better, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we did quite well.
Yeah.
But we met there, and somehow I managed to convince an actor from London, England, that moving to Edmonton, Alberta might be a great idea. But Edmonton does have a very vibrant improv community and great quality theater. It's a real theater town, oddly enough, and we have a big fringe festival as well, the biggest in North America. So Belinda moved to Edmonton and then subsequently started working for BioWare.
Okay, well that's good. So I just wanted to cover that before we moved on a bit. So I suppose it would have been in around about 2004, 2005 when BioWare would have started development on Mass Effect, and you said you've been doing like lots of bit parts and various levels in their previous games.
And usually I'd play a half a dozen characters, like in Jade Empire, for example. I'm just a bunch of people. I'm the Watcher, the guy who guards the Lotus Assassin stronghold. I was like an ogre and various other characters.
So did you audition for Shepard like you did other parts?
No, I was brought on before Shepard was cast, I was brought on at the concept art stage. Again, no voice actors had been hired. They just had binders full of things like, this is all about Krogan, this is all about Solarians. And I was brought on specifically to do a presentation to the devs with my ideas of, they gave me like a bunch of homework, here's all this stuff, and to come up with paid me to come up with a presentation on what the baseline members of each species would sound like. So what does an average Solarian sound like? What does an average Krogan sound like?
I didn't know this. That's pretty cool. So what was your did any of those pictures change over time? Were they like, nah, man, Krogan shouldn't sound like fairies?
Well, I mean, some stuff was obvious. Like the Krogan should probably have gruff voices because they're big, tough guys.
Okay.
And so that was obvious. And I can't take credit for all the Solarians sort of having the cadence of Steve Buscemi. Of them, hey, yeah, just talking like that, and because that was what I said a baseline Solarian should sound like, and they took that. They
I'm not a voice actor or an actor or anything, but like just as a nerd, that job sounds like a really cool one. So you must have been
great.
stoked, right?
I was so thrilled to, and it's like, ooh, working on a game right from the beginning, and some stuff they had to drop because I'd looked at the drawings of the Turians and like looked at their facial structure and thought, and I was trying to also to make each race very distinct. So I was just like, yeah, this one also sounds like Steve Buscemi.
Yeah,
because I'm getting paid here, so it's like, I better come up with some ideas.
Instead, they made Garrus really hot.
Yes.
Instead. Yeah. Okay.
Well, my suggestion, looking at the facial structure, was like, it might be interesting if they have like a little click at the ends of sentences.
Yeah, like the bird things.
Yeah, little bird stuff. But this was before Garrus was a main character.
Okay.
And once they realized that a Turian is going to be a main character, they're like, yeah, that click thing, that shit's going to get old real fast. So.
They were correct.
So yes, that they did not take. They basically just did a filter for Turian voice actors.
And you voiced all the Vorcha anyway, right?
The Vorcha, they didn't come along till 2. I'll get to that in a moment.
Oh,
that
okay,
one in a moment.
sure. I'm getting ahead of you
but,
now. Sorry.
The reason that the Volus have that sort of like wheeze when I threw that in. So but there's not that many Volus. If there'd been a Volus main character, they probably would have said that wheeze is going to get old fast. But they kept it in. And so during that process, I was asked to audition for Commander Shepard because they were like, we've been hearing your voice on some of the placeholder stuff because I was doing a thing where a Solarian bartender and the player character were talking to each other, and I just did both voices. And they said, we're really liking your sound as an idea for the player character.
Be honest with me, in the back of your head, were you like, I'm going to make this player character sound good, just in case they're keen on it? Or
I make everything sound good. I'm being paid. I do my job. I'm a professional. So I had no hope of getting it. I was just like, oh, sure, okay, I'll audition for the main character. That's great. We both know I'm just going to do some aliens. So I did. And despite, they keep saying, oh, you got another callback, and then I was told, it's down to you and 2 guys from LA. It's like, well, obviously one of them's going to get it, and I'll do some aliens. Then I was told, oh, by the way, yeah, you got it. You're going to be the main character, and you're going to be playing opposite Jennifer Hale as the female version. And I was a huge fan of Jennifer's from all of her animation work. I was a big fan of the Batman animated series, and knew
I'm
her.
a bad fan. I didn't know that I knew so much about Jennifer Hale's work. I didn't know she was in the Batman the Animated series.
She is Zatanna.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, in the original, and then of course in Justice League, she reprised Zatanna, and she was also Giganta on that, and so. And of course, I knew her from Knights of the Old Republic. She was Bastila. Bastila Shan in that. So I was thrilled, and I got to be a bunch of aliens too. So it all worked out.
Yeah. So I mean, that's great. Yeah. So did you know? I mean, it was part of the. Did you know going in? You were like, oh, this is going to be a trilogy, and I'm going to have this is going to be work for the next, on and off for the next 6 years.
None of that was guaranteed. There was sort of like, oh, we'll see how this does. And I knew BioWare did great work. I'd played their games, and quality often leads to success, but not always. You can't count on it. So I knew it was going to be good. I didn't know it was going to be so successful and so embraced by the fans. Like,
at what point did you realize it was going to be as big as it became?
I think it was. Well, first of all, when there was like, oh, by the way, here's an action figure of your character. So I collected action figures, so getting one of a character that I played was like, oh my God, this is definitely on the nerd bucket list, and I have crossed it off. I think, I started the first time I got invited to do a convention, and I was just like, really? Oh, that would be great. And that's how I actually got to first meet Jennifer. I didn't meet most of the cast during the recording
Well, that was
process.
going to be my question, because I think a lot of people might understand, like, because if you're like in my generation, you probably grew up watching like documentaries of, Disney films being recorded, and you see all the cast in like a room together talking at each other and playing off each other. So
no, it's not
how
like,
much of it was solo, and
that's
when,
how
when
they
did
record
you meet
The
the rest of the
Simpsons,
cast?
but we don't do that in video games.
Yeah, so when did you meet the other cast members?
I met Jennifer first,
Yeah.
and we'd spoken by Skype, and because we'd recorded some stuff for some awards show things, and so we knew we'd met each other.
Did you have to work
vocally.
with her somewhat close, because you're reading all the same lines?
We always had to. Our directors basically coordinated that.
Okay,
Like whoever recorded a scene first, if you had to change a bit of dialogue, like it's like this sentence is a bit of a mouthful to say. If like we flip this, it's easier. It flows better. We would do that, but we'd always keep very close track of that. Our lines also had to be the same length. Like they didn't have to have the same inflection or the same delivery.
Timing-wise.
Timing-wise, we had to take the same length. So
as in the exact length, or like Jennifer took 2 seconds, so you can't take longer than that, but you can be shorter if you need.
There was like perhaps a second's wiggle room, but not much more than that.
Okay. Yeah.
And so we had to coordinate that. And sometimes I would record a scene first. Sometimes Jennifer would record a scene first. Whoever recorded first, you'd have their performance in your headset.
Yeah.
And then you would know, okay, we got to match that exactly for length. So that was a bit of a challenge and a unique challenge. But getting back to, you said the moment when you're just like, this is big.
Yeah.
I think so. It was one of the first cons that I did. And somebody walked by me in just a very good Commander Shepard cosplay, like screen-worthy, like with lights and the whole bit. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is it.
Did you say anything?
I did. I immediately went, hey, I do that guy's voice. Yeah. I wasn't shy, no.
No, that's very good. So obviously the first game was very popular. Mass Effect 2 was insanely popular. Did the experience of making the games change as the series went on? Like I imagine the budget probably increased. Did the production
also, the
change?
length of the amount of work increased because there's all these branching options.
Yeah.
Once you get to 2, you have to cover all the branches that one. You might have killed a character in 1, so you have to record the dialogue with that character, and then the dialogue that you have with the character that they would bring in to replace them plot-wise. Or, again, you have to cover all the bases. You have to cover all the different branching possibilities for relationships. Like, you might barely know this character. You might have met them in the first game. You might actually be romantically involved with this character. You might have been romantically involved with this character and then broke up. So you have to cover all those options when you're doing a given scene with that character. Just exponentially from 2 it increased, and then 3 even more.
Mm-hmm. So going back to you, so you mentioned that you met Jennifer first because you had to work together for the lines. What about some of the other actors? Like how did you go about? When did you meet those people? Like,
it was all conventions.
Only conventions. So
pretty much.
What was the process like if you were recording a scene? Like it was where Shepard's talking to Liara. Would you get like the Liara recording, or would they have to?
It would depend
play
on
off
which
you?
of us recorded
It was
first.
the same situation.
Depending on schedule.
Yeah.
If the other person had recorded first, you'd have their performance in your headset, and it would play back. On the first game, we were using paper scripts. By the second game, we were basically on iPads, and like as your lines were firing, you'd hear their line, and you'd be able to respond to it. So it was very natural, and you weren't just acting into a vacuum.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
And if you were the first person, you were acting into a vacuum, but you would be the one setting the tone, and then other people would follow you.
So you mentioned that you did all this development for the various different species in Mass Effect, and you thought that if you weren't going to get the Commander Shepard role, you'd at least play some aliens. So, do you have a favorite non-Shepard part that you played?
I mean, probably, and the most popular. He's got his own merch. Blasto definitely is very popular, and so I played not only Blasto but a lot of the other Hanar. Like I'm the Hanar that gets called a big stupid jellyfish, so I'm calling myself a big stupid jellyfish, and various other Hanar, and Blasto, of course. And he's great because he was such like a little audio Easter egg that became popular enough that eventually he shows up physically in the Citadel DC, and you actually have a scene with Blasto and Shepard and a Vorcha, and they're all just talking to each other. And so that was a lot of fun. The Vorcha, also a lot of fun. As I mentioned, they came in Mass Effect 2. And I was the first one to lay down a Vorcha character. They said, we haven't decided what they sound like. You're the one who created the sounds of a lot of the alien races. Why don't you take a crack? So I basically did this screechy voice with no technique, like just
What
screaming.
did that sound like?
Like, well, I won't actually do it full on, but I will show you. What I did with the Vorcha voice was I'd always have a little bit of water in my mouth.
Gross.
And sometimes it would be like that, and then I just do. And again, that is like maybe 50% of what I was actually doing. So I did all of those Vorcha lines for that character, and they also did it at the end of the week because they're like, we're not sure how this is going to affect your voice, so we'll give you the weekend to recover. And the next week when I went back and I was recording more stuff, they went, yeah, they liked what you did for that Vorcha, but we don't want to have to ask any other actors to do that to themselves, and you seem willing to do that, so why don't you just play all the Vorcha that ever show up, ever?
They didn't just copy-paste the same line over and over
Yeah,
again.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, there's not that many talking Vorcha in the, there's probably like, I don't know, maybe half a dozen individuals that actually speak and say something. And there's, like multiplayer Vorcha, I did those too. But that's how I ended up as all of the Vorcha. And I would also occasionally I did a number of Volus. I'm Niftu Cal, the biotic god, the sort of the stoned Volus who thinks that he's God, but he's not. Or maybe he is. And then the Pizza Volus, he was a lot of fun. And various other Volus. I did, I think, at least one or two Krogan. I did several Batarians.
You did Krogan as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I see. I always assumed they threw a bit of extra digital Dijon on the Krogan voices.
I think they did.
Oh,
yeah.
they did. Oh,
like
okay.
I did as gruff and deep as I could
yeah.
manage, and then they would, beef that up a bit as well. I don't know if I ever played a Turian. I did definitely play a Quarian. He had a name, too. He was Praza. He's the guy who gets killed in Tali's loyalty mission in Mass Effect 2, I think. Yeah, maybe it's 3.
How good was Mass Effect 2, hey?
Yeah.
That's all good.
Praza shows up. He's the guy,
Yeah.
he gets killed by an Atlas mech. And that was fun because I basically just, got Ash's Tali recording. And, not all Quarians have her accent, but I wanted this Quarian. It's like, no, they grew up on the same ship. They should have the same accent. So, yeah, that was fun to get to imitate her accent. And there is, there's one scene in particular where Jennifer and I, the male and female Commander Shepard, we play a couple of mercs.
Oh, really?
Like just a couple of idiot mercs who get killed by Shepard. And it's us. It's like
Killing
I
yourself.
can't remember what mission it's on, but it's basically Shepard's crawled into a vent and has gone out and is killing everybody, and they're the last two, and they're standing at the vent that he went into, looking up at it, and they're just sort of arguing back and forth about who should go in first. And most of the time, you just go up and kill them without any trouble at all. But that's me and Jennifer.
Yeah, that's very cool. So I wanted to ask you. Well, I did want to ask you a bit about DLC in general in the process of doing that. But I think it's important to ask you that those of us who are old enough to recall what I'll call the in inverted commas, the controversy about the ending of Mass Effect 3, which I personally think was ridiculous. I wanted to ask.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the controversy about Mass Effect 1 when Fox said it was an alien sex simulator.
Oh.
And I mean,
well, where was the lie?
Let's be fair, they were right. But I think their moral panic was a little overblown.
No,
it was very satanic panic.
I was going to say, there's nothing.
No, they're
nothing
great at that shit. Yeah,
So
watch out for them.
What I personally found the quote unquote backlash about the ending of Mass Effect 3 to be ridiculous, and I think has led to anthropologically speaking, led to a whole other realm of nerd entitlement, which has since blown up from them. But I wanted to ask, what was it like experiencing that from your point of view?
In retrospect, it's like, we got off easy.
Yeah, well, exactly, right.
Yeah.
This is sort of like one of the proto incidents, but you see it. So what was it like experiencing that from your point of view? Because eventually you did have to come in and do a new ending for the game.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, even the most upset people never took it out on the voice cast. They took it out on the writers, and the writers were friends of mine, so I felt terrible for them. But on the other hand, I could sympathize with the fans who were maybe not. They'd invested a lot of time, and they'd invested personally in these characters. And the common element I found, because I'd talk to people at conventions, and sometimes they just needed to talk to get it off their chest. I never felt like they were angry at me or blaming me, but I was like, yeah, you need to talk about this, and so we did. And the thing that was common was people wanted closure, and they wanted clarity. And BioWare had sort of decided to do a more artsy 2001-esque
really good.
ending, which was
I loved it.
which
Yeah.
was really cool.
It's
but
it's a piece of art.
yeah,
Right.
it was art.
Yeah.
But again, closure and clarity was what they really were craving. And I think that between the extended endings, and by the way, like I like the extended endings a lot. Actually,
I didn't play it.
Oh,
so
okay.
I never went back. I was like, I like the ending I got.
Well,
so I never went and did it.
The
Yeah,
extended
so-
endings, they're cool. There's a little more clarity, and also I got more work out of it because Jennifer and I record one of the endings. It's the control ending is the one that we record, and that became my new favorite ending, because previously it was Destroy was my favorite ending because of course there is that Shepard's alive at the end,
that's the bit
with
I
the
got,
breath.
I think too. Yeah.
But after Control, after the extended ending, I was like, oh no, I like Control better because Shepard essentially becomes Galactus at the end. and I got to voice it, so that was fun. So between that and the Citadel DLC,
Yes.
and in particular the party on the Citadel, which is, I think, there was lots of fan service and lots of fun.
Did they at least get all the actors together to record that one? No, or was that all still remote?
What?
Like the party scene in the.
No, we
Citadel?
weren't. We were
You
all
didn't-
still
oh,
remote.
Okay.
But we had everybody in our heads.
Thought they might have forked out for that.
Yeah.
That's right.
I think it's also like just logistics because everybody's on different continents and very hard. But the party itself, my friend Kathleen Rootsart, who's a writer at BioWare, she really championed that and said we need to give them this, and fans very much like that party on the Citadel because you get to have all the characters come back, and you really do get to say goodbye to each of these characters that you've got to know, and you get to see characters that otherwise would never interact, like Rex and Grunt interacting with each other, and Zaid being, them comparing weapons and things like that, and lots of nice little character moments, and again, a chance to say goodbye. And with that combination, I know this is just apocryphal, or anecdotal, but I know a lot of fans were satisfied with that. They felt heard, and I think they. Not everybody, because some people discovered, as you say, people discovered, ooh, if I'm mad on the internet, people will pay attention to me.
Yeah.
But I think they gave the fans what they wanted with that, the clarity and the closure.
Mm-hmm. So when it came to recording DLCs and such, not necessarily those particular ones, but I'm thinking things like Kasumi's Lost Memory and that kind of stuff. Was that part of the initial wave of work when doing the first development, or would they call you back and say, "Hey, we're ready to start doing the DLC stuff now"? We
would basically there was some DLC stuff we would record during the whole process if it was done. Mm-hmm. Like usually the first DLC, some of that would be peppered into us preparing for the actual game. But the later DLCs, it was definitely like months down the road. Mm-hmm. So we recorded the Citadel DLC in, I want to say 2013, and 3 came out in 2012.
Yeah.
That was the Citadel was basically the last thing that I ever did for the trilogy for Mass Effect, and the very last line that I did is that. That response to hell of a ride, eh, Shepard?
Oh, that's really cute.
Just say the best. So the best was the very last line that I got to say. So yeah, that was fun.
Have you played through the games yourself?
I did complete Renegade and Paragon playthroughs of 2. When it came to 3, I'd already been playing at BioWare. So so like before release, I played about 9 or 10 hours in on. I think it was a Renegade playthrough because I always play Renegade first. And so when it released, and of course, they gave me a free copy and everything, mm-hmm. I realized, my save game is at BioWare. I'm going to have to...
So you tell me you've never actually saved humanity from the Reapers?
I've never actually done the full thing.
Okay.
Because I didn't have that thing of... I always like to have finished the previous game before we started working on the next one. And when it was like, well, this is the last one, I don't have to worry about it. Okay. So I'm saving that for my retirement, and especially now that the Legendary Edition is out.
Right, okay.
When I retire in a couple of decades, I'll just sit back and play that, and also finally have time to play Baldur's Gate 3. Well, that I am saving. I haven't played it yet, because when I play a game like that, I want to be, I want a week to 10 days where that is all I'm doing. I play that, and I sleep, and then I get up, and I eat, and then I go back and play the game. Yeah.
It's really refreshing to meet people, someone like yourself who is so important to so many people in like this nerd culture, and then also discover that you're just as much of an insufferable nerd as we are. It's really good. It doesn't happen often.
Perhaps
but it's just
more so. You have to be in my basement full of toys.
Exactly. So, look, thank you so much for sharing all this information with you. I'm glad that you were
Thank
were
you. Thank
happy
you
to
all for
start
coming.
from
Appreciate it.
the very beginning. Hopefully, it's illustrated to everybody in the audience that you've had a very storied and interesting and not necessarily stereotypical pathway to where you've ended up in your career. And I wanted to finish with something probably a bit more tactile on your end. But
Sure.
if you could give a piece of advice to anyone in the audience who is pursuing a career as an actor, what would it be? Would it be to just quit the university degree you're doing and join the circus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll work out. Yeah, I take no responsibility for your life, though. I will say this. I often, if you want to get into, as I call it, professional pretending, improv is a really great tool for pretty much any branch of acting you would care to consider, including, I'd say very much including voice acting. When you're acting for video games, you are often not given the script ahead of time, especially video games, because they want secrecy. And so being able to jump right into a situation, jump right into a character, give a cold read, those are very valuable skills. And of course, you're going to get a chance to fine-tune your performance with your director, but being able to hit the ground running, that improv really does help you with that. And again, pretty much any branch of acting. And depending on where you live, here in Melbourne, you actually have quite a good improv company, Impro Melbourne. And I know Patty Stiles, who is their artistic director. She was actually the former artistic director of my theater, Rapid Fire Theater in Canada. And when I started, she was one of the instructors. So she taught me improv. So if you are interested in acting, I would say improvisation, look for improv classes, and it's a really great place to start, and you will get to meet other people with similar interests. A little more practically, Jennifer Hale, my Commander Shepard compatriot, has started something called Skills Hub. And if you follow Jennifer on social media, she posts about it all the time. It's essentially an online school and resource where she brings in fantastic instructors. I think Steve Bloom has done some stuff for her, Aaron Fitzgerald, various other great voice actors. And she covers all aspects of voice acting, from stuff in the booth to the business end of things to auditioning, and it's great. You actually get hands-on instruction with these fantastic instructors. So Skills Hub, I would recommend that.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Now, if anyone would like to get a chance to talk to Mark briefly, get a photo or a signature, you're about to be up in the meet and greet room, which is two floors
is that
up.
Upstairs?
Yes, so we'll be heading up there now. I think that's from 1:30 to 3:30 today?
I don't know. Hold on.
I think it's something like that. This is dynamite content right here. Just watch
It
us.
goes from 1:30 to a certain time.
1:30 to 3:30. So
There
yeah,
you go.
that'll be
Okay, so
opportunity.
I'll be there.
But
for a
otherwise,
couple
can everyone
hours.
please give Mark a wonderful round of applause for sharing us?
Thank you.
We have to
Thanks
leave.
very much, everybody. And thank you, Brian. Enjoy PAX.